I stood in the shadows of the ballroom, the safety harness still chafing my shoulders, smelling of ozone and sweat while my father adjusted his silk tie on stage. It was the 30th anniversary of Luminina Events, the empire I had physically built with my own blood and blistered hands. But when the spotlight hit him, he didn't call my name. He called Christian's. My brother, who had spent the entire setup scrolling Instagram, was now the new partner. When I cornered my father in the hallway begging for an explanation, he didn't even blink. He just patted my cheek and delivered the sentence that killed my loyalty. "Sweetheart, you are the hands, Christian is the face." I didn't scream. I just realized my contract had finally expired. Before I tell you what I did next, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I want to see who's awake with me right now. To the outside world, Luminina Events was magic. It was crystal chandeliers descending from vaulted ceilings, immersive light shows that made tech billionaires weep, and seamless transitions that felt like wizardry. But I knew the truth. I knew because I was the one sweating in the rafters, calculating load-bearing ratios, while my brother Christian was busy picking out the font for the cocktail napkins. His title was creative director. His actual job description seemed to be scrolling Pinterest for mood boards and taking credit for the physics equations I solved in my head at 3:00 in the morning. For a decade, I was the structural integrity of this company. I was the one who knew that the ballroom at the Ritz had a faulty neutral on the west wall. I was the one with the harness burns on my thighs and the permanent scent of electrical tape on my hands. Just last month, during the Apex Tech Summit, our biggest contract worth $250,000, Christian forgot to order the three-phase power distribution units. It was a rookie mistake, the kind that turns a high-end conference into a silent dark room. I didn't panic. I didn't run to Daddy. I stayed awake for 48 hours straight, manually rerouting the venue's power grid so the keynote speaker wouldn't be standing in the dark. When the lights came on, my father slapped Christian on the back and told him he had excellent vision. I was in the back of the room washing grease off my hands with sanitizer invisible. For years, I tortured myself with the question of why. Why was I the one who actually kept the lights on, treated like a glorified janitor, while Christian, who couldn't wire a lamp without supervising, was treated like a prodigy? It took me a long time to understand the architecture of my common father's ego. You see, Edward didn't start in a tuxedo. He started in a beat-up van with a ladder and a desperate need to be someone else. He hated the dirt under his fingernails. He hated the sweat. He spent 30 years building a facade of effortless luxury to hide the blue-collar reality of where he came from. And that was my crime. I was the reminder. When he looked at me with my steel-toed boots and my tool belt, he saw the struggle he was ashamed of. He saw the van and the ladder. But when he looked at Christian's smooth, polished, useless Christian, he saw the lie he wanted to believe. Christian was the reflection in the mirror that told Edward he was an aristocrat. I was the reflection that told him he was a laborer. He didn't promote Christian because Christian was capable. He promoted him because Christian was a vanity project. And you don't put the person who fixes the plumbing on the poster. You hide them in the basement. That night at the gala, standing in the shadows of my own hard work, I finally realized that my competence wasn't my ticket to the top. It was the very thing keeping me at the bottom. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't pace the floor or scream into a pillow. I sat at my kitchen table drinking black coffee, feeling a cold crystalline clarity settle over me. At 5 in the morning, while my father and brother were likely sleeping off the champagne from their victory lap, I drove to the warehouse. The air was crisp and smelled of rain. I parked in my usual spot, unlocked the side door with my key fob for the last time and walked into the silence. I didn't trash the place. I didn't cut wires or hide files. That would have been emotional, and I was done with emotion. I was methodical. I packed my personal gear, my custom rigging harness, my calibrated light meters, the lucky carabiner I'd had since I was 22. I cleared my hard drive of personal data. Then I sat at my desk and typed a resignation letter. It wasn't a manifesto. It was 3 sentences. I am resigning from my position as technical director effective immediately. My company credit card and keys are on the desk. Do not contact me. I printed it, signed it, and placed it right next to the master key ring. The heavy set of brass keys that opened the loading docks, the electrical panels, and the safe. Then I did the hardest thing I have ever done. I walked out the door, locked it behind me, and dropped my fob through the mail slot. I didn't leave. The parking lot. I moved my truck to the street, reclined the seat, and waited. I needed to see it. At 6:30 the crew started arriving. Riggers, electricians, drivers. They stood by the bay doors drinking coffee, waiting for me to let them in. They waited 10 minutes, then 20. I watched them check their watches. I watched the confusion ripple through the group. Usually the coffee was already brewing and the assignment sheets were posted. Today the building was a fortress. At 7:15 Christian's Porsche pulled in. He was 45 minutes late, wearing sunglasses, looking hungover. He strutted to the front door, tried the handle and frowned. I watched him pat his pockets. I watched him realize he didn't have a key. He never carried keys. He didn't need to. Taylor was always there. Taylor always opened the door. He walked around to the loading dock, banging on the metal with his fist. He pulled out his phone and dialed my number. I watched my phone light up on the passenger seat. I didn't reach for it. I just watched it ring. Until it went dark. For years I had told myself a lie. I told myself that being essential was the same thing as being valued. I thought if I made myself indispensable, if I carried every load and solved every crisis, they would have to respect me. Sitting there watching my brother kick the door of a building he now theoretically owned, I understood the trap I had built for myself. I wasn't promoted because I wasn't good enough. I wasn't promoted because I was too useful right where I was. I was the load-bearing wall. You don't move a load-bearing wall to the penthouse. You leave it in the basement to hold up the structure. My competence had become my cage. I picked up my phone but not to answer Christian. I dialed Nathan, the senior producer for the Apex account, who had been trying to poach me for 2 years. He answered on the first ring. "I'm in," I said. "When can I start?" He didn't ask questions. He just said, "Today." I put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving my brother standing in the parking lot, screaming at a steel door that wasn't going to open. The next morning my phone didn't ring. At 10:00 I received a calendar invite from Edward exit interview. It wasn't a request, it was a summon. I walked into his office, the same office where I had spent countless hours explaining basic profit margins to him, and sat in the low chair he kept for visitors. It was a power move, making sure his eye level was always higher than yours. Christian was there, leaning against the window, scrolling on his phone, already mentally measuring the square footage for his new gaming lounge. Edward closed his hands on the desk, giving me his best benevolent patriarch smile. "We've been talking," he said, gesturing vaguely to Christian, who didn't look up. "We know you're emotional right now. Change is hard, and frankly we're willing to overlook your little stunt this morning with the keys." He slid a piece of paper across the mahogany. "We crunched the numbers. We're prepared to raise to stay on as senior tech, $3.50 an hour." He leaned back, waiting for my gratitude. $3.50. That was the value he placed on the decade I spent building his reputation. It wasn't a raise, it was a tip. I looked at the paper, then at him. "No," I said. The smile vanished. "Excuse me." I said, "No, I'm not negotiating, Edward, I'm leaving." His face hardened into a mask of ugly, unfiltered contempt. "You think you can just walk into the corporate world?" he sneered. "You think anyone out there cares about your little wiring diagrams? You're a technician, Taylor, you're a pair of hands. The only reason clients tolerate you is because you have my last name on your business card. Without me you are nothing." Christian snorted from the corner. "Let her go, Dad. I can hire 2 guys for what we pay her. Besides, I need this office for the VR setup." I stood up. I didn't defend myself. I didn't list my accomplishments or scream about the injustice. I realized in that moment that arguing with a narcissist is like trying to explain color to a man who gouged out his own eyes. "Good luck with the VR setup," I said to Christian. "Make sure you check the load capacity of the outlets first." I walked out. 2 weeks later I was standing on the 42nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Chicago. My new office didn't smell like ozone and old coffee. It smelled like fresh leaves and ambition. I had a team of 4 engineers, a budget that made Luminina's annual revenue look like petty cash, and a title that finally matched my resumed director of technical operations. Nathan, the client who poached me, treated me like an expert, not an expense. I was in the middle of reviewing the schematics for a global product launch when my personal phone, which sat silent on my desk, began to vibrate. Then it buzzed again and again, a steady, frantic rhythm. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Mike, one of the riggers back at Lumina. Then a missed call from the venue manager at the convention center. Then a voicemail from Edward. The notifications stacked up like a car crash in slow motion. "Urgent pickup. Fire Marshal is here." It was the opening day of the Apex Tech Summit, Luminina's crown jewel contract. The job Christian was supposed to lead. I took a sip of my sparkling water and watched the phone dance across the desk. I wasn't the firefighter anymore. I was just a spectator watching the house burn down from the safety of a high-rise. An hour later, Nathan called. His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man who was watching a multi-million-dollar investment evaporate. "The fire marshal shut us down," he said. A lighting truss snapped. It missed the keynote speaker by 3 ft. We're evacuating. My stomach dropped. I knew those trusses. I had designed the load calculations myself. They were rated to hold 5,000 lb. The rig hung only weighed 2,000. Physics doesn't lie and steel doesn't just snap. Not unless it isn't the steel you ordered. I need you to look at the procurement logs, Nathan said. We're doing a forensic audit right now. He sent the files over. I opened the digital ledger on my dual monitors and started digging. It didn't take long. I knew where the bodies were buried because I used to dig the grav for the cables. I pulled up the original purchase orders I had written 3 months ago. I had specified aircraft-grade aluminum trusses from a manufacturer in Germany. Then I looked at the actual invoices Christian had submitted to accounting. The part numbers were almost identical. Almost, he had changed. Single digit. Instead of ordering from the German supplier, he had routed the order through a shell vendor based in Nevada. I traced the vendor's registration. It was a PO box. I traced the shipping manifest. The trusses hadn't come from Germany. They had come from a discount factory in Shenzhen known for making stage props, not load-bearing industrial gear. I did the math. The German steel cost $80,000. The Chinese knockoffs cost $12,000. Christian had built the client for the high-end gear and pocketed the difference. He had done the same thing with the cabling, the power distribution units, and the LED panels. It was the white label betrayal. He was buying dangerous substandard junk, slapping aluminum custom sticker on it and charging premium prices. In total, he had skimmed nearly $250,000 off the Apex budget. I sat back in my ergonomic chair, staring at the numbers. This wasn't incompetence. Incompetence is forgetting to order lunch. This was wire fraud. This was grand larceny. This was criminal negligence that almost killed a person. And then I saw the signature on the purchase approval. Edward. My father had signed off on the vendor change. Knowing him, he probably didn't know about the theft. He likely thought Christian was being a shrewd businessman, finding a cheaper supplier to boost margins. He thought he was mentoring a genius. In reality, he had signed off on his own destruction. He had authorized the installation of counterfeit equipment in a room full of the most powerful tech leaders in the world. I picked up the phone. Nathan, I said, you're going to want to call your legal team and the insurance investigators. The gear isn't rated for the load. It was never rated for the load. I see, Nathan said. His voice was ice. Thank you, Taylor. We LL handle it from here. The line went dead. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a cold, heavy finality. My brother hadn't just burned a bridge. He had planted explosives on it and stood in the middle while he detonated them. By tomorrow morning, Lumina Events wouldn't just be a failing company, it would be a crime scene. The next afternoon, the receptionist buzzed my office. Her voice was hushed, nervous. Tuller, there are 2 men here to see you. They say they're family. I looked through the glass wall of my conference room. Standing in the lobby were Edward and Christian. They looked like refugees from a shipwreck. Edward's suit was wrinkled, his tie loosened, his face grey with exhaustion. Christian wasn't wearing sunglasses today. He looked small, terrified, like a child who had broken something he couldn't fix. Send them to conference room B, I said. I'll be there in 5 minutes. I didn't rush. I finished my email. I checked my schedule. I took a sip of water. Then I walked down the hall, my heels clicking rhythmically on the polished concrete floor. When I opened the door, they both stood up. The room was sleek, modern, surrounded by glass, a fishbowl of accountability. Tuller, Edward said. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. Thank you for seeing us. I didn't offer them a seat. I just stood at the head of the table waiting. We need help. Christian blurted out. He was shaking. The Apex contract. They're suing us. They're talking about fraud charges. Dad says we could go to prison. We didn't know. Edward interjected quickly, throwing his son under the bus without hesitation. I didn't know about the vendor switch. Christian made a mistake, a terrible mistake, but we can fix it if we can. Get the right gear installed by next week. Maybe we can settle. He looked at me with desperate, pleading eyes. We need you back, Tuller. We need someone who knows the systems. We're willing to make you a partner. 50-50 split. You run operations. Christian steps down to sales. We'll rename the company Lumina and Daughter. Anything you want. I looked at them. I looked at the father who told me I was nothing without his name. I looked at the brother who stole my work and sold it for parts. They were offering me half of sinking ship. They were offering me the honor of cleaning up their crime scene. I opened my mouth to tell them about the forensic audit. I wanted to tell them that Nathan already had the invoices. I wanted to scream that 50% of 0 is 0, but then I stopped. I realized that ugwang with them was a form of intimacy. It was an investment of energy. It was an attempt to make them understand, and they were incapable of understanding. To argue is to say, I still care what you think. So I did. Something more powerful. I stayed silent, I let their words hang in the air, I let the silence stretch heavy and suffocating. I watched Edward's hopeful smile falter, I watched Christian fidget. The quiet grew louder than any scream. It forced them to hear the echo of their own desperation. It forced them to sit in the reality of what they had done. 10 seconds, 20, 30. Edward's face crumbled. The arrogance, the bluster, the benevolent patriarch mask all slid off, leaving a scared old man. "Please," he whispered. "You're my daughter." I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt. There was only the cool, detached observation of a structural engineer looking at a building that had been condemned. "I can't help you," I said finally. My voice was soft, calm, final. "But you built this company," Edward cried. "You can't just let it die." "I didn't kill it," I said. "You did. When you chose the image over the structure, when you chose him over me, I walked to the door and held it open." "Tulla, please, Christian." "Buggered, I don't want to go to jail." I didn't answer, I just waited. The silence was a wall they couldn't climb. Defeated, they walked out. Edward looked back once, tears in his eyes, but I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I watched them walk down the hall past the receptionist and out the glass doors, disappearing into the street below. I didn't watch them leave the building. I went back to my desk, sat down, and opened my email. There was a message from Nathan. "Legal team has filed. Insurance is covering the venue damages, but they're going after Lumina for subrogat pun. It's over, Tulla, you're clear." I closed my laptop. It was over. The next few months were a blur of headlines and legal proceedings. Ivory Events filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. The white label scandal made industry news a cautionary tale about cutting corners. Edward lost his house, his car, and his country club membership. The trappings of the identity he had cherished more than his own daughter. He moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, living off social security. Christian was indicted for wire fraud. He took a plea deal to avoid prison time, but he was banned from holding any executive position for 10 years. Last I heard, he was working at a car rental agency near the airport. As for me, I didn't just survive, I thrived. My team and I rebuilt the Apex Tech Summit from the ground up. When the doors opened 6 months later, the lighting was flawless. The rigging was secure. The client was static. Nathan promoted me again, giving me equity in the firm. I bought my own apartment, a loft with exposed brick and steel beams, honest materials that didn't hide what they were. Sometimes late at night I think about that moment in the glass conference room. I think about the silence. It wasn't just a tactic, it was a realization. For so long I thought my value was something I had to prove to them. I thought if I worked harder, bled more, fixed more, they would finally see me. But you can't make people see what they refuse to acknowledge. You can't build a foundation on quicksand. I didn't destroy my family. I just stopped holding up the roof they built on lies, and when I stepped away, gravity did the rest. I stood on my balcony looking out at the city lights, thousands of them stable, bright, enduring. I had built a life that didn't need their validation to stand. I was the architect of my own value, and for the first time the view was beautiful. If you've ever had to burn a bridge to light your own way, share this story. And if you're still holding up a roof for people who wouldn't hold an umbrella for you, maybe it's time to let it fall. If you enjoyed the story, hit like and subscribe for more story like this. You are not alone. God bless you. Thanks for watching.